liability. Lynda and I have presented before. I was fortunate enough to do a webinar with her, and I'm going to tell you, you are in for a treat. You're going to learn a lot from her about really interesting communication issues and how to address those, even if they're your own or your employees. Understanding the costs of poor communication. Maybe someone doesn't get a job. Maybe someone gets fired from a job. Maybe it costs the company money to have to defend a lawsuit. Avoiding the legal landmines of Title VII. So I'll explain what Title VII is and how that really ties into possible communication issues. Learning how to approach employees with poor communication skills. Lynda will talk about those. Also to educate managers to reduce corporate liability. It's great that you have all of these policies and procedures and handbooks, but do your managers know what they are, and are they following them? And finally, recognizing and improving your own communication skills. One thing that we had on the chair, on the small white piece of paper, is a grammar test. So if you want to take some time to do that, today we will hand out the answers at the end. And finally, an overview of issues that we will address today are the 3 V's of communication. And before I start, I know we had 77 people sign up, and this room holds more than that. So if you need a handout and you weren't able to print out so you can take notes, please let us know. In fact, I'll hand these out. I can do it. Oh, wonderful. And it's double-sided here, so just need one. Okay, great. I'm so glad I remembered that because you guys might want to take some notes. Okay. We'll talk about communication barriers in the workplace, national origin discrimination claims. I have some current cases and very interesting matters for you to learn about today. English-only policies. Are they legal? Should you have them? Communication repair toolkits, and then finally we have a breakout activity for all of you. So, shall I introduce the first of the, okay. We're going to show you a very short video about literally how someone's accent costs them some money.
Yes! Now for the ride! N! 3 N, right? That's my L, an E, 2 E's.
She didn't win. She said swimming, not swimming.
We'll get into that in a little bit, a little more about that. When communication can be costly, even in a game show. Now, that's vernacular. In fact, when the news report came on, the news reporter said that's vernacular. Vernacular is dropping the R also. So all around the United States, we have many dialects, and I'll get into that as we proceed in the next hour. But communication can be a problem in the smallest ways in something like a game show. Effective communication is critical in the workplace, and good communication will usually result in successful outcomes. On the other hand, poor communication may cause a lot of problems, and we'd like to talk a little bit about some of the costs of ineffective communication. To me, and this is near and dear to my heart because I am a speech pathologist by training and worked many years in the hospitals, and I do a lot of work with doctors and nurses and allied health professionals. Communication breakdowns can cause a lot of mistakes, as all of you know, and you've probably experienced with your employees or your colleagues or anybody in your organization. When you get into the healthcare arena, A mistake in communication can cause a medication error, an injury, or life-threatening consequences. Those life-threatening consequences then start to have legal ramifications. So the mistakes that result from communication breakdown can be tremendous. Another thing you can start to see as people aren't communicating, and we're talking about a lot of different types of communication here today. I'm talking a lot about just making yourself understood, but there are also communication styles due to culture. And as many of you know, there may be a breakdown. Maybe somebody doesn't listen when you're talking, not because they don't understand you, but because they don't have very good listening skills. So there are many things that can happen, and I'm not going to read each one of these to you, but you can see that as communication breaks down, the efficiency of the workplace breaks down, as well as the costs, the financial costs that result, as well as the legal ramifications. So it's critical to really focus on communication and make sure that everybody has optimal communication skills.
So I'll talk without the microphone, but by a show of hands, if you've ever witnessed someone with a workplace communication challenge that you've worked with, or who's a customer or a client, what was that challenge? And by show of hands, was it a heavy accent? Limited language proficiency? Poor pronunciation? Poor grammar? See that a lot in writing also. We were talking earlier about emails and how about voice issues? And if you're not sure what those are, Lynda will go into some more detail. Okay.
So communication skills is a very large term, and what do we mean by communication skills? First of all, when I do a lot of work with individuals who may say to me, I just don't think I'm professional enough, or I've been promoted, and now I have to conduct meetings, and I don't think I'm coming across well, I don't think I sound professional. And so professional speaking skills, just helping somebody learn the tools so that they can come across in a professional manner is something that we can do. Foreign accent modification, I think, speaks for itself. Many people are proficient in English, and they're wonderful in their technical skills. And yet when they have to start speaking or presenting at committees or at meetings or conferences, they're not as well understood. And I've done a lot of work with scientists, engineers, IT professionals, people who have to speak to the public, and they're very good at what they do, but they can't communicate it as well. And they can speak English and write English very well, but when they start to speak it, it's not as clear. Regional dialect modification, that's that woman on the Wheel of Fortune. We're living in a world where everybody's communicating very easily now across the country, around the world. With that will come foreign accents and regional dialects, which I will talk about. Telephone skills. How many of you have people working in your organization, and when they're on the telephone, you may cringe because they're not presenting the right picture for your organization, and they're the first person that you need. You talk on the phone, if somebody calls up, they talk on the phone, their grammar may not be good, they may be mumbling, they're not projecting their voice, they're talking too quickly, whatever it might be, that's something that would need to be addressed. What about people who speak English as a second language and they have to go to conferences and have small talk? They may know how to talk about their scientific knowledge base, and then they're put in a room like this maybe, and they're at the lunch and they're trying to talk to people. They don't know how to engage in small talk. And many of us, even if we're born in the United States, have concerns about that. So how can you have small talk? How can you network? What about the writing skills? What about the emails that some people are sending? My goodness, it's amazing. And people not using spell check or grammar check. And you cannot leave out the listening skills, because as all of you should know, communication is a two-way street. We may talk very well, and if I'm talking, I could be giving the best information, but if you're not listening, it doesn't really matter. So we need to make sure that we are showing good listening skills when we're talking to our employees, people below us, people above us, colleagues. All of these come under the umbrella of communication skills. So the way I like to look at communication is with the 3 V's, which Laura alluded to before. The visual, how you look, and I don't just mean what you chose to wear that day, but how you look. When you look at me, you've probably formed an impression when you saw me stand up, when you saw Laura stand up. You already set up an impression. It may not be correct, it may not be accurate, but you set something up. the vocal, how do we sound? And I'll get into that in a little bit. And the verbal, what do we say? So those are the 3 V's. Now, a study was done in the early 1980s, I was going to say 1800s, but 1980s out of UCLA, and it's a very well-quoted study, which some of you might have heard about, but it's a very misrepresented study. So let me explain a little bit about what this is. The 3 V's, the visual, the verbal, and the vocal, which I just talked about, they analyzed how likable people were when they met them. And this is where they misquoted it. They talk about everything, communication in general, but it's actually when you meet somebody, how likable somebody is. What do you weigh as the most important? The visual, what they look like, the vocal, what they sound like, and the verbal, what they say. And so you have the handouts, the note-taking handouts. Take a minute and see what percentage you think it might be. And what my biggest question is, what is the turquoise one? The smallest one. So take a few minutes to think about that and see which one is the turquoise, the visual, the vocal, or the verbal. Does anybody have any thoughts on what they think the turquoise one might be? How many people think it is the visual? Okay. How many people think it's the verbal? All right. And what about the vocal? Okay. How many people know of this study? Okay. So these are the results. Now, with an attorney in the room, it's hard to say that the verbal is a mere 7%. With a speech pathologist or a communication trainer, it's great to see that the vocal is 38%. But remember, this isn't for the whole presentation. It's when you're first meeting somebody. But think about this. How often do you speak to people on the telephone and you don't get to see them? So of course these numbers aren't the same, but it makes you realize that this vocal has a huge impact. And I'll give you some examples in a few minutes and you'll see what I'm talking about on different vocal styles that can be very pleasing and some that can be unbelievably grating and you just can't listen to it. So here's an example of the consistency or lack of consistency in the message. You see what this says. We're looking at the verbal, right? And if I said to you, I don't have a problem with you. Now, is that consistent? Did my visual and my vocal match the verbal? What about this one? That's great. Right? But I could have said, that's great. And so when you start to see that the visual, the vocal, and the verbal are not congruent, you get very confused. And you're not sure which is the message you should follow. And chances are you're going to follow a lot of the visual, a lot of my body language, my facial expression, and then my tone of voice. And then the verbal doesn't mean that much. And that's where that pie chart makes sense. So you may have all the right information. If you cannot deliver it and you don't look the part, it's going to affect your message. So let's look briefly. Again, I go into workshops with all of this, and I always have this desire to try to tell you everything, but we don't have the time for this. So I'll briefly go through the visual. So some of these are obvious. It's facial expression. It's eye contact, which everybody knows is important to have eye contact. An appropriate smile is so important. I know some people who are sometimes the bearer of bad news, and they're saying it with a smile on their face. And so if you're terminating somebody's employment and you're smiling, it's not going to come across as genuine, all right, or empathic. So you need to make sure that your facial expression, it's nice to smile, but it's nice to smile when it's appropriate. If it's bad news, change your facial expression, or you lose all your credibility. Your body language, posture speaks volumes. So if I stood up here this whole time talking like this, or slouched over, you would see me as a different person than somebody who hopefully is standing up straight. What about my gestures? And this is really a challenge for me today. I don't like to hold anything in my hands so I can gesture. This is fine, which I'm used to, but today we have to also hold the microphone. Holding things in your hands prevents the gestures. You want to have genuine gestures. You don't want to be moving all over the place, and you don't want to be rigid all the time. Excuse me. I clearly cannot put my hands in my pockets. I don't have pockets, but when you're holding things, you can't do that. The thing to be careful about is not to start playing what's in your hand, because then it becomes distracted and you start watching what I'm doing or I drop it and it distracts from my message. Nervous habits. How many people play with their hair, turn the rings on their fingers, play with their bracelet, do any number of things that they don't even realize, wring their hands as they're talking. All of these things, if you start talking to somebody and you're watching the habit, then the message is not getting conveyed in the best way. So take a look at just how a simple tilt of a head or lifting up of a chin can change the way you perceive somebody. So we have this same person who's meeting you for a job interview, and we have several different looks. Now, of these 6 pictures, which is the one that you would hire? 6. Okay, why 6? Okay, she's sitting straight. Smiling. What about 5?
Too casual.
She looks friendly enough. Now, again, it would depend what type of job are you hiring her for, right? So you might choose one is a little more casual and sweet, like one who's tilting her head, but that's not going to be the powerful and confident image. What about this one? How confident does she look? Okay, looking up. And this one, how approachable does she look? So the interesting thing, and while I'm talking about this one, she looks like she's somewhat making eye contact, but her eyes aren't engaging. And here she is thinking while she's talking probably, and just looking up, that a lot of us do when we're thinking about what we want to say. So again, remember, the mere tilting of your head, or whatever movement it might be, is going to change your whole image. So now let's talk about what do you hear. And if I'm booming the whole time, you might feel like I'm blasting you out of the room and you want me to tone my voice down. I'm sure you know people who do both these things. The voice quality. What about the person who's coming to talk to you and she speaks like this? How mature does she sound? How serious does she sound? And what about the person who's trying to really sound confident and gets this harsh voice? Or someone who really wants to sound very authoritative and drops their voice in pitch. And a lot of women may try to do this. I've heard often they say, for women to be powerful, lower your pitch. That's not what you do. All right, your voice is too low. And as far as quality is concerned, I can't leave out the nasal person who talks like this, and she says, there's nothing I can do about it, it's how I talk. Well, it is how you talk, but you can change it. So there are many things that we can do to change our voice to sound more powerful. How often have you met somebody and you've spoken with them on the phone, and when they show up, there's a total disconnect. They're so much more professional or more mature than you thought they were on the phone, or vice versa. That's when the messages are not congruent. Vocal variety. I don't have to tell you what monotone is, but somebody might not want to have a monotone voice, and so they talk like this, and they put so much expression when they're talking that you just can't take them seriously when they're speaking like that. Then there's the uptalk. How many people here know what uptalk is? Okay, we're Valley Girl talk. We're talking like this, and the meeting's going to be at 5, and some people use this to be very friendly, but I don't really sound very sure of myself. And the interesting thing is I've spoken to some business consultants, and they tell me that they intentionally use this style. So you might choose it in certain situations, because if my voice goes up when I say something, I'm trying to be a little more collaborative. Like, are you with me? Do you understand? So it may be an intention to let your voice go up, but be aware when you're doing it, because usually you're giving up power, and a consultant may choose to do that. But you don't want to do that if you're supposed to be the authority. Appropriate pitch. The person who speaks too high, and I already talked about the person who speaks too low. Rate and pausing. If somebody's speaking so fast and never comes up for breath, and they're talking, you just can't even follow them, and they're going from one thought to another, and it's exhausting listening to them. And you think of the quote-unquote used car salesman, and you wonder how genuine and honest is that person. Or the New Yorker who speaks quickly, and I can say that because I was a New Yorker. I guess you're always a New Yorker. Fluency. Okay, this is something everybody can relate to. What about the ums, ahs, you knows, kind of, like, all these things that you insert because you just don't know how to fill the space? The best way to fill the space is what? Pause. Don't fill the space, and your message is more meaningful. And then, of course, there are the grammatical errors and the pronunciation, and something that's very typical, particularly in Maryland and some more southern states, is the dropping of the word ending, saying things like I'm talking or swimming, all right? Or I'm working on a project. It's a project, and I have many tasks. Many people say I have many tasks, and just drop off the ending and not put all the consonants at the end. So all of these are aspects of the vocal, and you can see why vocal is so important. I won't say too much about verbal, but just think about the words you use. I know is so much more powerful than I hope, I'll try, I think. So try to use powerful words when you're talking. Avoid tag questions, and what I mean by tag questions would be the meetings at 4, isn't it? Women tend to do this a lot, and it's very collaborative, but it makes me less confident when I speak this way. On the other hand, some men may choose to do this if they're speaking to a group of women, because it is a more collaborative approach to speaking. Just know what the reasons are for using these different patterns. Avoid acronyms and abbreviations unless you're all in the same industry. And be careful how you're saying them. People may not know what you're talking about, so how effective are you at that point? Avoid hypercranioloquy. Does anybody know what that could possibly mean? Yes?
Trying to sound smart using big words.
Trying to sound smart using big words or make it go hyper above the brain. You're talking way over people's heads. And I actually thought this was a word because I received it on one of my vocabulary newsletters. And when I looked it up further, it's not a word. But it's the exact point that I'm trying to make is don't use words like that because nobody really knows what it means. And so people, I'm sure you know the people who are using beautiful vocabulary, but you're really not sure what they're talking about. So what is the point of that? Make things clear and concise so people understand you. Avoid empty intensifiers. This tends to be something women and more youthful people will do more than others. So avoid words like just and really and so. So for example, instead of saying, we just love seeing that really fantastic show on Broadway, it's like, enough already, we get the idea. Right? Just say, we love seeing that fantastic show on Broadway. It's much cleaner when you say that. The more you start adding, you're really taking away from your message rather than adding to it. Okay, I threw around the term accents, New York accent, regional dialect, foreign accent. The question often comes up, what is the difference between a dialect and an accent? And there actually is a difference, but we use the terms interchangeably. A dialect is actually when people all speak the same language. So it could be in the United States. Everybody's speaking English for the most part. I think that's changing too. But people speak English, but there are pockets of the country that are isolated from other pockets, and this was more years ago than it would be today. And so there are dialects for those particular areas. We tend to say a Boston accent, a New York accent, a Southern accent, but they're actually dialects. The same would be in India. There are many dialects of the same languages, and those would be called dialects. Accents, actually, are when somebody speaks a language. Let's say my first language is Spanish, and then I go to speak English. And what I'm using is this sound system and the muscular control of my first language when I speak the second language, and the rhythm pattern. So when you hear somebody, you can hear the Chinese accent or the Spanish accent. It's the rhythm. They're using the rhythm of their native language and transferring that onto speaking English. So those are the differences, but you will hear accent thrown around for all those terms. So let me give you an example of an accent here. Fortunately, it's not playing through our PowerPoint today, so let's see.
Many of you will recognize this. It's very cute.
I know that I have an accent, but people understand me just
Not yet. You will recognize that, but not yet. I'm sorry. Here we go.
Is it possible to two youths to one?
Oh, what was that word?
What word?
To what? What? Did you say ute?
Yeah, 2 utes.
What is a ute?
Is it possible to 2 utes?
Okay, so that's the 2 youths. Okay, so just to quickly talk about dialects. I'm from New York, and I came down to Maryland, and everybody in Maryland talks about going down the ocean. Well, in New York, we went to the beach. So if I'm in a workplace and I'm new to that region, I may not even understand what they're talking about. One of my colleagues told me this one, and I was amazed. Now, you're getting some clues here because you see the picture, but if I said to you, Yin's gone downtown, would you know what I'm talking about? Is anybody here from Pittsburgh? Well, that's Pittsburghese. But again, if you're hearing that in the workplace, you may not understand. What about, this one's a little near and dear to me, I'll have some pizza and beer. When I went to the University of Maryland as a New Yorker, that was one of the first things they called me on. I was saying pizza and beer in those days. That's a New York accent, or even a New York dialect, or from Boston. What about this one? I heard some wicked news at the Bubbler. Do you know where that's from? Boston. Actually, a water cooler is a bubbler in Boston, and wicked is probably the most overused word in Boston. Again, would you know if they're talking and you're working in Boston or talking on the phone with somebody in Boston, would you know what they're talking about? So those are the dialects.
So quickly again, just to make sure you're not falling asleep, although I'm sure you're not. Fantastic. How much of your workforce, or your clients or customers you're working with, how much of your workforce includes non-native English speakers? So less than 10%? Probably most of you. 10 to 25%? Okay. 25 to 50%? Any greater than 50, anyone? Okay, so we'll probably first. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about foreign accents and what we look at with this. With foreign accents, I mentioned before that the rhythm of the language, you're using your native language. So one of the problems, I've developed training materials, I didn't mention this before, but I've written training materials for people who speak English as a second language on how to modify their accent. And there are several rules that they need to master that we don't learn if we're native speakers. Nobody ever taught us the rules of stress. We just say it that way. And then a non-native person would say to you, well, why do you say it that way? And we usually don't know. But there are some rules that I've put together. First of all, numbers. If I said to you, I'll see you in 15 minutes, which did I say? Now think about the healthcare. If I said something was 16 milligrams, how much was it? And that's the medication error I was talking about that can have. So we typically, and you may not realize this, but American-born speakers would say 15 minutes and 50 minutes. We change the rhythm. And if you don't learn to do that, you're not going to be as easily understood. For proper nouns, if I told you my name is Lynda Wilner, it wouldn't sound right because it's really Lynda Wilner. But when a non-native person is talking, they may, in their language, they may be emphasizing the first name rather than the last name. But in the climate in the United States, we're not understanding that. Compound nouns, it's a parking lot, it's a boardroom, and it's a laptop. And I once had somebody say to me, my roommates never could understand what I was talking about. And I said, well, what did you say? He said, I told them I can't find my car keys. And nobody knew what I was saying. Well, it's car keys. And those subtle changes, think about a person talking or presenting information in a meeting, and they're mixing up all the stress. It takes you may understand them, but it takes you longer. And then you start to focus on how the person's saying it rather than the content. Oh my goodness, abbreviations. I mentioned the acronyms. But if somebody, one of my clients was telling me something about the CEO, and I wasn't sure what a CEO was. It's a CEO. So if you don't stress, and did anybody teach you that when you say abbreviations, you stress the last letter? That it's IBM, it's a VP. We do it, but nobody ever taught us how to do that. Pronunciation is a little more obvious, and if you've spoken to people who speak English as a second language, you know what's happening there. the sound, the consonants and vowels aren't coming out clearly. So they may mix up bleeding and breathing, which could be a huge problem for a doctor in an emergency room. Verse and worse, which you see with a lot of people from India. Leave and live. And there are a lot of nurses who are concerned about these vowels because they say they won't go into the room and ask the patient anything about their sheets because they know they're misunderstood. Think of what I meant by that. Okay. And then walk and work. A lot of people can't say the R's with vowels. So they may say, I have to go to walk. Well, if you think that person's taking a break, they really mean they have to go to work. And so be careful about that. Other quick things are grammatical differences because not every language uses articles. The nouns and verbs may not agree. So it's not that they're not educated. They're speaking a second language and they haven't incorporated all of those rules of grammar. And what about the idiomatic expressions which we use all the time? There was a psychiatrist who once said to his colleague, my patient said to me, I'm fed up, I've had it. What do you think he has? And this doctor truly didn't understand that that was just an expression. So if you don't know what those expressions mean, there's a big lag in how you're understanding the people that you're working with. Okay, I gave you a preview a second ago to this, but I'd like you to look at some of these clips. I had to listen to these clips, and I watch Modern Family. I had to listen maybe 10 times before I figured out what some of them were, and I'm going to share them with you. Let me just open this up here.
Listen closely because she speaks so quickly. It's hard to hear what she's saying. I'm trying to listen to it. I lost her. That's everything.
I know that I have an accent, but people understand me just fine.
I thought you said hair rings.
I didn't say herrings, I said herrings. Oh, what about Mirabel's daughter's quinceañera?
I honestly didn't get any of that.
I called your secretary and told her to order you a box of baby cheeses. It's like Christian Science reading room. We're going to the drop-off.
She means drop off.
How do you say in English?
Helicopter.
You just throw them an Obama steak and you use the air bunnies.
That doesn't make sense.
It's ended. He even boxed with an alligator.
Wrestle.
I know what she thinks. A gold digger. But I'm nice, and I put on the sugar jacket to be the wind in his back, not the spit in his face.
I am so confused right now.
The last thing Manny needs on his first day of school is you undermelting his confidence. And a gargoyle is a gargoyle.
She means gargoyle.
We can be even like a Steven.
You heard how she said that, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Jace.
That's what I said. It's gorgeous in Spanish. Mejor que su padre. Vámonos para el colegio.
What are you talking about?
What's the word? Curse my tongue! Okay, now! You try speaking in another language. Everybody out of the house! I know that.
Okay. So it's a wonderful clip to watch because you really can get a sense of the frustration, both with Gloria, for those of you who watch this. There are several things going on. Word choice, right? She doesn't know the word for helicopter. You may not have gotten all of these, but as I watched it maybe by the 10th time, the Obama steaks were Omaha steaks. And the sugar jacket was sugar coating. And I won't go take all this time to talk about these. We'll play it. If there's time at the end, or if any of you want to watch it again, we'll show it to you, or just go to YouTube. But it's a wonderful clip and gives you a great example of the frustration. These people are speaking more than one language. That's more than many of us do. So there's going to be frustration with communication. Which brings us to what Laura can talk about now as far as this workplace is changing. And there are a lot of non-native people and a lot of diversity in the workplace.
Tell a quick personal story. A lot of families, as you'll see in the United States, we're diverse now, right? 1 in 8 Americans is Hispanic, 1 in 10 Americans is foreign born. You know, we're not hearing a lot of native English speakers here, as Lynda can attest to. So recently for the holidays, I have a cousin who married a German woman, and she's a young child who was running all over the house and getting into everything. And she speaks to her son in German only. She doesn't speak to him in English. So she was running around after him saying, 999, you know? And my son didn't understand what that was. So got in the car and he says, Mommy, why did she keep saying the number 999? I said, it means no, no, no. You know, so it's happening. And a lot of these foreign-born immigrants want to teach their children and want to keep that rich language and culture alive. So many children are bilingual, trilingual, and listen, that can be very good in the workplace. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide and talk about I hope I don't trip over this wire here. Hold it. We're going to talk about how Lynda's presentation and my presentation actually come together here. And let me explain the federal, the state, and the local laws, and really talking about, and going back to Gloria, and going back to foreign speakers, they often can be discriminated against because people don't understand, they don't think they're smart enough, they don't think they understand the work, they may not socialize the same way, and that creates a lot of perceived or actual discrimination. So what is Title VII? Title VII prohibits employment discrimination based on only these things: race, color, religion, sex, and national origin, okay? Title VII does not protect under disability or with respect to age. That's covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and the ADEA, which is the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, that's what that stands for. So state law has some additional protections in Maryland here. Additional protections, so in addition to race, color, religion, sex, and national origin, Maryland state law also covers discrimination based on ancestry, which could be foreign, right? Marital status and sexual orientation. And then certain Maryland counties also protect based on discrimination, family status, political opinion, personal appearance, or source of income. So what is discrimination? Discrimination is, many of you are in HR. Are you in HR? Okay, great. Whether you're new or old to it, this will be a good refresher or some good education for you. Discrimination really, very simply, is employment decisions based on stereotypes or assumptions about people because of their protected classification. How do they look, right? What's their age, religion, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, etc. Also, what many people don't understand is that discrimination can be denying employment opportunities to people because of their marriage to or association with someone of a particular race, religion, national origin, someone of a protected category, protected classification. So my cousin, who's married to a German woman, is an architect, and he often goes into several companies and he pitches, to build the building and design the building. If it would come out that he was married to a German woman and he didn't get the job because he's married to a German woman, that could be discrimination because of his association with someone who's in a protected classification. What is workplace harassment? We're not going to talk about sexual harassment today, although that's one of my favorite topics and it's always very juicy to talk about. But workplace discrimination is workplace harassment is harassment based on unwelcome conduct in the workplace because of someone's protected classification. Often, we know what sexual harassment is, but people can be harassed because of their race, their national origin, and accent, age, disability, etc. And some examples of unwanted harassment are the epithets, the slurs, the negative stereotyping, intimidating acts. I mean, think about, an epithet, a negative word that refers to women. Don't say it. Think about that negative word that refers to someone who's a different race, right? Someone who is of a different national origin, someone who's of Latin background, right? You all can think in your head, yeah, I've heard that, I've heard people say that before. And these things are sometimes said in the workplace, and that's where the problems arise. In addition to that, there's also the written and graphic material that's written or circulated, the written or graphic material circulated within or posted in the workplace. So I got a call from a client, lovely company, family-owned business, diverse workforce. They had an African American woman who had managed there for about 20 years. Everyone got along very well with everyone. She came into work one day, and sitting on her keyboard of her computer was a noose. So it might not be a word that said, but it's the symbol, right? It's the letters KKK written on the bathroom wall. It's the picture of the swastika, in the women's or the men's bathroom. Those are really important symbols we all need to be aware of and make sure they are erased, they are painted over right away. Question, here we go, okay. So what exactly is national origin, right? I mean, we all know what age is, we all know what race is, and generally it's a little confusing, but we know what a disability is. But what's national origin? It's based on ethnicity, the physical, linguistic, or cultural traits. The video of Laura speaking in such a heavy Spanish accent. Are we going to discriminate against her in the workplace because we don't understand what she's saying, or will we take the time to be patient and say, can you repeat yourself? I'm not sure what I didn't understand what you said. And then of course perception. Just because someone looks Middle Eastern, right? I mean, when 9/11 occurred, shortly after that, national origin discrimination claims spiked. They didn't ever get as high as race discrimination or disability discrimination, which those are the two, especially disability, that's now getting up there. But folks, just if you looked Middle Eastern in the workplace, were really experiencing a lot of discrimination and were filing claims, as they should have if it was legitimate. And also, it's the perception. Is it the misperception or the proper perception about someone's appearance, their dress, their jewelry, their mannerisms, and maybe even, food choices? Yeah. What are they bringing to lunch? What are they bringing for breakfast? Are they typical ethnic types of meals? And that can really, whether it's, my husband loves Indian, he's not Indian, but if an Indian comes to work eating Indian food, maybe people won't like that. Maybe they don't like the smell, and maybe they start shunning the coworker because of those choices. So this can come up in very subtle ways. It's just really important to be aware of all of these. And finally, these are important because we're going to get to a couple cases, and I want to just give you the background about what a hostile work environment is. Because you hear this term bandied about all the time in the workplace if you're in HR, but most employees don't know the legal definition and they always get it wrong. So first, don't read it. I'll tell you what it's not. A hostile work environment is not when someone is constantly late, right? Or didn't meet the deadline, is a poor performer, and the supervisor says, Lynda, you were late 3 days last week. You really need to come into work, more timely. Or Lynda, you missed that deadline. I'm going to rate you off for that. Okay, so it really costs us a big job. Or Lynda, you're socializing way too much with your colleagues. You're taking an extended lunch. I'm going to give you your second warning for that. And then the employee says, you are creating a hostile work environment for me. You are riding me. You are focusing on me and no one else because somebody else was on that team and we all missed the deadline. But you only came to me. You're creating a hostile work environment. That is not a hostile work environment when supervisors and managers are legitimately disciplining, coaching, counseling, and correcting employees. What a hostile work environment is, okay, it's a very complicated definition. And we're in the Fourth Circuit here in Maryland. It's the federal Fourth Circuit above the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland. We have very conservative judges. So in order for someone to establish a hostile work environment, it's a very high bar. And this is what the bar is. A hostile work environment is one that a reasonable person, not someone with thin skin or someone who's sensitive, is one where a reasonable person would find hostile or abusive. And it's determined by looking at all of the circumstances, right? Was a racial slur made one time? Or is it made every day, right? Looking at all of the circumstances, the frequency, the severity, is it physically threatening or humiliating? and this is the hardest one to meet, is it unreasonably interfering with an employee's work performance? And that's where most people fail, right? Because you can say, employees say, well, I can't, I don't like that he says this to me, and it makes me upset, but is the employee really falling down on the job, not able to perform, missing work, has to go and get counseling because of all the stress that they're under. So it's a very high bar. Okay, there's one case I wanted to talk about before I get to this one, which is just really, really interesting. This is a settlement that occurred, what am I doing on time? Okay. All right. Well, you know what? I'll skip this, and I'll stick with the script. This is very recent. This is the largest settlement that the EEOC recently had. The circumstances were 69 Filipino nurses won a settlement against their employer, which was a hospital in California. What happened was the CEO of the hospital in 2006 had a meeting with everyone and said, if you speak a different language, particularly they were focused on Filipinos. So if you cannot speak your native language at all, anywhere inside the hospital, I don't care if you're on your break, I don't care if you're on your cell phone talking to a relative, I don't care if you're in the cafeteria, you cannot talk your native language, it's English only. And in addition to that, the CEO would have the other nurses and would have janitors and security guards follow around the Filipinos to spy on them and then report anytime someone would speak in their native language. I mean, obviously, it's important to speak English when you're communicating to a patient, as Lynda talked about. You want to make sure, particularly if that patient speaks English, that the nurse speaks English. But what happened was, they were being mocked for their accents, and in fact, one woman came in and brought, as I mentioned, a native meal, and one of her coworkers took an aerosol can and sprayed her food and said, "This just smells too bad. I can't stand the smell." That's why they got almost $1 million, because it was, if you go back to the last slide, and we're talking about a hostile work environment, a reasonable person, right, is going to look at these circumstances and say, why is there an English only policy when they're communicating at lunch and they're off the clock? Who cares? Why are you spying on them and having them walk around, the hospital following them? Go back one more. Okay. The severity, the frequency, it happened for 3 years it went on. So they filed a lawsuit and ended up, the hospital decided to settle for almost $1 million. It wasn't worth pursuing it and exposing themselves to all of the additional embarrassment that would come out. So, real quickly, English-only policies. Anybody have them in their workplace? Okay. So maybe I won't focus on it too much. Are they legal? Maybe, but only for safety and security reasons, okay? And also for proper communication. If here we're in the United States, so we speak English here, patients need to speak English, teachers need to teach English, they shouldn't be teaching, tag along when they're in, an English class. In what situations are English-only policies appropriate and when aren't they appropriate, okay? And there are some guidelines, but it doesn't sound like this is a big issue. Should I keep talking about it or move on? Give me a move on. Fine, remove those chains. Okay. Okay. So here are some tips for consistent treatment of your employees in the workplace. Train your managers, as I mentioned. It's great that you're all here learning this, but if you're not taking this knowledge back to the frontline supervisors and the VPs of HR and everyone else, they're not going to know, what to do and how to treat employees properly. Have updated job descriptions. This is really important, especially as Lynda was mentioning earlier. If you're hiring a front desk receptionist and she has to answer, or he has to answer the phone with a very thick accent, and can't even pronounce the name of the company so that anyone can understand it, include that in the written job description, that they need to speak and write proper grammar and English. Have a conscientious HR department. All of your companies obviously do, which is why you're here, but some don't. As you all probably know, either where you are or where you come from, you have several people juggling HR responsibilities, and they're not up on all the current laws. Engage in fair treatment of employees. Okay.
One thing I'll also mention, Laura, that you might address real quickly is that if in fact somebody does not hire somebody because of an accent, it is not considered discrimination if they need communication skills for that particular job. So it's fair to say if they have to be a customer service rep on the telephone and they have a heavy accent, somebody else may be just as capable but doesn't have the accent, it's okay to hire that person, even if they're not as capable, because they don't have the accent.
That's right, and that was actually a case that was decided about 20 years ago, and it's still good law that if it was in the written job description, the job required that the person deal directly with the public, and in the job interview, the gentleman that was applying it was very difficult to understand in an in-person interview, and much of his communication would have been over the telephone with folks, and he was not hired. In fact, the court went on to talk about the BFOQ, the bona fide occupational qualification. BFOQ, which is you need to speak English where people can understand you, because that is a requirement of the job.
I'll quickly talk about active listening skills. I'm thinking that most of you know this, and I alluded to it already before. But again, the eye contact, leaning forward towards somebody, is going to make you more engaged with that person. Using nonverbals or head nods or Did you ever talk to somebody, I won't talk about genders, but did you ever talk to somebody and say, "Are you listening to me?" And they say, "Of course I'm listening to you." Well, how would I know you're listening to me? You're not saying anything, right? You're not looking at me. You're not even saying, Those subtle things, which women tend to do a little more of, are wonderful ways to show that you're an active listener. Rephrasing what they're saying so that you don't misunderstand each other. So you might say, I think you're saying that you're dissatisfied with the way that project went, and then they have the opportunity to tell you whether you're right or not. Observe the speaker's nonverbals. Ask them questions. By all means, don't interrupt them. When you're interrupting, you're not really listening. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, we need to have tools of what do you do when you're talking and they don't understand you. Now, I don't know if there are non-native speakers here with accents, but this is something where it becomes an issue, that you're saying something and they don't get what you're saying. What should you do? Remain calm. Don't scream it again and again and again the same way. Maintain eye contact, and this is really true for any type of communication problem. People who stutter, it's the same type of recommendation. They stay calm, keep eye contact, and try to talk to the person. Make sure you're speaking loud enough, but don't start yelling because they don't understand you, because as we all know, that doesn't help us understand it any better. Repeat it one time, but if that doesn't work, you have to do something else. Explain it another way. Use a visual or point or gesture or show them something so they know what you're talking about. Maybe even spell that difficult word that they just cannot figure out what you're saying. And emphasize that word when you're talking. So that should be the stress word. Usually, if you use these, it will help. And if it doesn't, just try to find another way. I already said try another way to say it, but that becomes a challenge. And then just understand that obviously they need help with their communication skills if you cannot be understood using these. But then I get more questions. Over the years, people are saying to me, what do I do when I don't understand my employee? Because they have an accent or a speech problem, what should I do? Well, ask them to repeat for the first time. Maybe have them spell that word, and then you'll get it. Observe any of the nonverbal cues. Maybe the body language is helping you understand it. Maybe their tone of voice. Maybe they can show you something. All of these things, try to be a good listener and observe, and that might help you understand. if you're in a group situation, let's say you're at a meeting and somebody's saying something and you just can't get it, to save your embarrassment and their embarrassment, just defer it to a later time. Like, why don't we talk about this after the meeting? And then hopefully in another situation you'll understand that. Okay, what we'd like to do is a quick breakout activity. We would love an hour and 15 minutes, really isn't enough for all the things we'd like to do here. What we'd like to do is do a quick breakout activity, and what Laura and I are going to do is we're going to demonstrate a supervisor and an employee. We want you to watch what we're doing and see what you think about how we're communicating. On your notes, you have a section where you could look at, don't worry about the verbal. The verbal, actually, the script that we're using is coming from the Essential Performance Review Handbook by Sharon Armstrong, and she gave us permission to use the scripts, although we changed it a little bit, so we have some other changes in there. And what I'd like you to do, is watch what we're doing and take some notes. Laura, should they get in groups or let them just do it themselves at this point?
Well, why don't you watch
Or no,
us?
watch us and take notes and talk with your partners.
Yeah, and then maybe you could talk amongst the rows. Yeah. We thought the room would be configured